December 7th, 1941. Over the vast, sun-drenched expanse of the Pacific, a lone Japanese Zero fighter sputters. Fuel is critically low. Below, an island emerges from the blue haze, a sliver of green and gold the world has largely forgotten. This is Niihau, Hawaii's Forbidden Island. For the pilot, Airman First Class Shigenori Nishikaichi, it's a lifeline. For the islanders, it's the beginning of a nightmare. Nishikaichi's plane, scarred from the attack on Wheelerfield, makes a desperate crash, landing in a bumpy pasture. The impact is violent, a screech of metal against earth. Immediately, residents rush to the scene. They see not an enemy, but a man in peril. They pull the dazed pilot from the mangled cockpit. He's injured, disoriented, but alive. The islanders, a tight-knit community of about 130 Native Hawaiians, do what comes naturally. They offer comfort, share their food, and promise to arrange a boat to the main island of Kauai as soon as the rough seas permit. It's the spirit of aloha, pure and simple. Among the first on the scene is a man named Howard Kaleohano. As he helps the others, his eyes catch sight of a pistol and a leather pouch inside the wreckage. Acting on a deep, unspoken instinct, he quietly secures them. He doesn't know what's inside: maps, codes, vital military papers, but he feels their importance, a strange weight in his hands. He tucks them away, out of sight. For now, the pilot is a guest, and the islanders treat him as such. They even throw him a small party, a luau, to lift his spirits. Nishikaichi, unable to communicate beyond a few gestures, seems grateful, but a frantic energy buzzes just beneath his calm exterior. Niihau is a world unto itself. There are no phones, no electricity grid, no harbor. Contact with the outside world is limited to a weekly supply boat and a few precious battery-powered radios. It's on one of these radios that the world comes crashing in. A crackle of static, then a panicked voice cuts through the calm island air. Pearl Harbor has been attacked by the Empire of Japan. The words hang in the air, heavy and cold. The easygoing atmosphere evaporates in an instant. Glances are exchanged. The islanders look at the Japanese pilot, their guest, and see something new. Something dangerous. The man they saved is not just a stranded aviator. He is the enemy. The pieces click into place. Kaleohano realizes the significance of the papers he's holding. Nishikaichi, seeing the shift in their faces, understands he's been discovered. His polite facade drops, replaced by a steely resolve. What the islanders don't know is that this was no accident. Japanese military planners had designated Niihau as a rendezvous point for damaged aircraft, mistakenly believing the island was uninhabited. Nishikaichi hadn't landed on the wrong island. He had landed on exactly the island he was supposed to, but it wasn't empty. And he had a mission: to retrieve his papers at any cost. Suddenly, the isolation that had protected Niihau for generations becomes its greatest vulnerability. They are cut off, alone with an enemy pilot who is growing more desperate by the minute. He knows what's in those documents. He knows he cannot let them fall into American hands. On this tiny remote island, a private war is about to begin. The kindness offered so freely just hours before is now on a collision course with a soldier's unyielding duty. The quiet heartbeat of Niihau quickens, bracing for the storm to come. The lines have been drawn, not in the sand, but in the hearts of the people who call this isolated paradise home. They are trapped, and they are on their own. The quiet hum of island life had been replaced by a low, anxious thrum. There was no police force on Niihau, no quick way to radio the Navy. The island's defense was simply its people, a network of watchful neighbors bound by a shared unspoken unease. The pilot, Shigenori Nishikaichi, was never truly alone. He was treated with courtesy, offered food and a place to rest, but always under the steady gaze of men like Howard Kaleohano. It was a guard without uniforms, a prison without bars, and for a trained Imperial Japanese Navy airman, it was maddening. Every polite gesture, every offered meal, was a moment he couldn't use. His mind raced, replaying his training. Secure the weapons. Destroy the papers. The documents tucked away by Kaleohano contained codes, GRID references for the fleet information that could not fall into enemy hands. His mission wasn't over just because his Zero was a wreck on the shoreline. The war, for him, was still very much alive in the rustling cane fields of this tiny island. This tension pulled others into its orbit, particularly the three residents of Japanese ancestry. Ishimatsu Shintani, an older, first-generation immigrant, reacted with fear. He withdrew, his face a mask of worry, wanting nothing to do with the pilot or the trouble he represented. And then there was Irene Harada. Born in Hawaii, her heart was torn. She saw the fear in her neighbor's eyes but also felt a confusing pull of sympathy for the young, stranded pilot who shared her heritage. But it was her husband, Yoshio Harada, whose loyalties began to fray most visibly. Also born in Hawaii, Yoshio found himself increasingly drawn to Nishikaichi. The pilot, speaking through the Haradas who acted as interpreters, was charismatic and persuasive. He wasn't a monster. He was a soldier, a patriot serving his emperor. He pleaded for his papers, weaving tales of disgrace and the importance of his duty. They are personal, he'd insist, his gaze intense. Of no value to anyone but me. Yoshio, feeling the weight of shared ancestry and perhaps a sense of misplaced responsibility, started to listen. He saw not an enemy combatant, but a man trapped, just like him, between two worlds. Howard Kaleohano, however, remained unmoved. He listened to the translations, watched the dynamic shift between the pilot and Yoshio, and quietly moved the captured documents to a more secure hiding place. He trusted his instincts, and they were screaming that these papers were more than just personal letters. The days bled into nights. The Pacific, usually a comforting presence, turned restless. Rough seas churned, cutting Niihau off completely. No boats could make the crossing from Kauai. The radio remained stubbornly silent. The small community was on its own, adrift with a secret that was growing heavier by the hour. The courtesy began to wear thin. The pilot's patience snapped. The urgency that had been simmering beneath the surface finally boiled over. He knew he couldn't wait for the Americans to arrive. He had to act. He found his moment with Yoshio Harada, a whispered conversation away from the watchful eyes of the others. A plan was forged in desperation, fueled by the pilot's duty and Harada's conflicted loyalties. Under the cover of a moonless night, the two men moved toward a storage shed, a place they knew held the island's few firearms, a shotgun and a small rifle used for hunting. The polite fiction of the guest was about to be shattered. The quiet tension that had gripped the island for 5 long days was about to be replaced by something far more dangerous. The shed door creaked open. A moment of fumbling in the dark, the cold touch of steel, and then a sound that cut through the chirping of crickets and the distant roar of the surf. The sharp, metallic click of a round being chambered into a rifle. In the sudden, profound silence that followed, the entire island seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the storm that was about to break. The fragile peace on Niihau shattered. The pilot, armed now, and Harada, his reluctant translator, began to move through the village. Their authority wasn't born from respect, but from the cold steel of the pilot's pistol and the uneasy familiarity of Harada's presence. Fear, a foreign poison, seeped into the community, turning friendly glances into looks of suspicion. They moved the islanders like a herd, their voices sharp, their intent clear. They were hunting for one thing, the papers Kaleohano had taken from the Down Zero. But Kaleohano was gone. He had seen the shift in the wind, felt the coming storm, and slipped away into the encroaching darkness. With the precious documents clutched tight, he vanished toward the jagged lava outcrops and the dense, thorny kayau thickets that clawed at the island's edge, a ghost in his own home. Among the terrified villagers, whispers became the only form of defiance. A sideways glance, a subtle hand gesture, a quiet word passed between cousins as they fetched water. This was how a community that had known only trust began to fray. They were a family, but a predator was now in their midst, and it was turning them against one another. The pilot's desperation was a palpable thing, a frantic energy that grew with every passing hour. He spoke in rapid, guttural Japanese to Harada, his eyes scanning the horizon. The codebooks, the maps, his wrecked Zero, everything had to be destroyed. He held onto a sliver of hope, a rumored rescue submarine that might be waiting somewhere offshore. But as the waves crashed against the coast with relentless indifference, that hope seemed as distant and unreal as the world he'd left behind. Was anyone truly coming for him? Or was he utterly terrifyingly alone? It was then that a figure of immense calm stepped out of the frightened crowd. Ella Kanahele, a man built like the island itself, solid, powerful, unshakable. He was a hunter, a fisherman, a man whose hands knew the land and the sea. Beside him stood his wife, Kealoha, known to all as Ella, her presence as steady and reassuring as his. They spoke with a quiet strength that cut through the fear. They would be the go-betweens. They would talk to the pilot, try to reason with him to protect their neighbors from the escalating madness. It was a selfless, dangerous offer, a shield raised against the coming violence. But the pilot's mind was no longer open to reason. His world had narrowed to a single burning objective: find Kaleohano and destroy the evidence. As night deepened, the island was bathed in a surreal, hellish glow. The pilot and Harada, their faces illuminated by flickering flames, had set fire to Kaleohano's small house. They were trying to burn away their problems, to erase the man who held their secrets. The fire consumed the simple wooden structure, sending plumes of thick black smoke curling into a starry sky that offered no answers, no solace. Next, they turned to the wrecked Zero. The sleek machine that had fallen from the sky was now fuel for their desperate act of concealment. Flames licked at its fuselage, melting metal and turning the symbol of imperial power into a smoldering ruin. The fires cast long, dancing shadows that twisted the familiar landscape into something monstrous. The glow of the burning wreckage reflected in Ben Kanahele's eyes. He and Ella now stood with the cold barrel of the pistol pressed against them. The pilot, his face a mask of grim determination, forced them forward. He believed the Kanaheles, with their deep knowledge of the island, could lead him to Kaleohano's hiding place. Every step Ben took was heavy, each footfall a calculation. He walked into the darkness, his wife by his side, under the watchful eye of a desperate man. He was weighing the risk, the inevitable pain, against the plan that was beginning to form in the depths of his mind. It was a plan that might save his community, but he knew, with a chilling certainty, it was a plan that could very well cost him his life. The night wind wasn't just cold, it was alive. It hissed through the tall, sharp-edged grasses, carrying the scent of salt and fear. Every sound was magnified in the darkness. The crunch of sand underfoot sounded like breaking bones. The rustle of a leaf was a whisper of warning. We were three shadows on a dark beach, caught in a trap of our own making. Nishikaichi was coming apart. His eyes, wide and wild, darted from the shadows to the sea and back again. He was a cornered animal, terrified of capture, but even more terrified of failing his mission. The pistol in his hand was an extension of his panic, trembling with a life of its own. He kept muttering, a stream of frantic Japanese that I couldn't understand, but the terror in his voice needed no translation. And then there was Harada. He stood a few feet away, the shotgun held loosely in his hands, his face a mask of conflict. He looked from the frantic pilot to me, his neighbor, the man he had shared meals with. He was caught between two worlds, the quiet life he had built on this island and the demands of a nation he barely remembered. His loyalty was a fraying rope, and I could see it snapping, strand by strand. I knew this was it. This was the moment. There would be no more talking, no more negotiation. It was now or never. I took a deep breath, the salty air burning my lungs, and locked my eyes on Nishikaichi. The world seemed to slow down, the hissing wind and crashing surf fading into a dull roar. In that bubble of silence I moved. I didn't think. I just launched myself forward, a sudden, desperate burst of motion. The sand gave way under my feet as I lunged, closing the distance between us in a single, breathless stride. The pilot's eyes widened in shock, his mind too slow to process the attack. He reacted on pure instinct, his arm coming up. The first shot was a hammer blow to my shoulder. The force spun me, a searing, white-hot pain exploding through me. But I didn't stop. Adrenaline surged, a fire of its own, pushing back against the pain. The second shot caught me in the hip, a deep, sickening thud that sent a shockwave down my leg. I staggered, my balance failing, but my momentum carried me forward. The third shot was a low, brutal impact in my groin, and my vision swam with black spots. The pain was an ocean, and I was drowning in it. But I didn't fall. From the corner of my eye, I saw a blur of motion. It was Ella. Her face was a mask of pure fury, fierce and fearless. She moved like a shadow, a heavy rock gripped in her hand. She brought it down hard on Nishikaichi's arm, a sickening crack echoing in the night. The pilot screamed, a high, thin sound of agony, and his pistol clattered onto the sand. That was the opening I needed. I surged through the agony, a primal roar tearing from my throat. I grabbed the front of his uniform, the fabric ripping in my grip. He was light, surprisingly so. With a final, explosive effort, I lifted him off his feet. He thrashed, his good arm flailing, but it was useless. I swung him, using his own weight against him, and hurled him into the jagged face of the rock wall behind us. His head connected with a wet hollow sound that made my stomach turn. He slid down the rock, dazed and groaning. I didn't hesitate. The knife was already in my hand. It wasn't a clean strike. It was messy, desperate. A brutal, sawing motion across his throat. It was the final terrible punctuation mark to a sentence written in blood and fear. It was over. Silence fell, absolute and crushing. It was broken only by the gentle shush of the surf on the sand and my own ragged, heaving breaths. My legs finally gave out, and I collapsed to my knees, the world tilting crazily around me. A sudden, sharp report shattered the silence. I looked up. Harada stood silhouetted against the pale moonlight, the shotgun now pointed at himself. He hadn't said a word. He just recognized the line that had been crossed, the point of no return. He simply made his choice. The silence that followed was even deeper. I knelt there, bleeding, listening to the wind and the waves. Then, a new sound, a new light. Up the beach, small points of light began to appear, bobbing in the darkness. Lanterns. The islanders were coming, drawn by the gunshots. Their lights trembled in the wind as they gathered, their faces etched with shock and concern as they formed a hesitant circle around me. I was alive, but only just, and then I heard it. Faint, but growing steadily stronger. A low thrumming sound from somewhere out beyond the reef. The sound of a motor. At last, the outside world was coming. When dawn broke over Niihau, it revealed a scene of chaos and exhaustion. The Navy finally arrived, greeted by a community shattered yet standing. They pieced together the story in fragments. A burned-out Japanese Zero, a dead pilot, a neighbor's tragic suicide, and the incredible tale of how this tiny, isolated community had just fought its own private war. This was the aftermath, the moment a secluded island's 7-day ordeal collided with the outside world. Recognition for the heroes of Niihau was swift. Ella Kanahele, the man who had faced down a machine gunner with his bare hands, survived his wounds. For his extraordinary bravery, he was awarded the Medal for Merit and the Purple Heart. His wife, Ella, who had stood steadfastly by his side, and Howard Kaleohano, the first to sound the alarm, were also officially commended for their courage. They were the ordinary people who had done extraordinary things when their home was threatened. But the story doesn't end there. For Irene Harada and Yoshio Shintani, the aftermath was a different kind of trial. Swept up in the paranoia and suspicion of wartime, they were taken into custody. Despite their differing roles in the incident, both became symbols of a nation grappling with fear and questions of loyalty. Their fate highlights the complex human tragedy woven into the larger conflict. And this is where the story of one small island casts a long dark shadow over history. In the halls of power, far from the beaches of Niihau, U.S. officials seized upon the incident. They presented it as definitive proof that Japanese Americans, as a group, could not be trusted. The actions of two men on a remote island were tragically twisted into a justification for the mass internment of over 100,000 innocent people. The Niihau Incident became a key exhibit in a policy born of fear, a policy that would scar the nation. Think about the layers of miscalculation. Japanese military planners believed Niihau was uninhabited, a safe place for a downed pilot to await rescue. They were wrong. American leaders, in turn, saw the complex human drama of fear, coercion, and loyalty on the island as simple proof of widespread disloyalty. They were wrong in a much more profound and devastating way. And so the story of Niihau becomes a cautionary tale. It's a story about courage, yes, but also about how fear can distort truth. It reveals how easily a narrative can be manipulated to serve a political agenda, with devastating consequences for real people. The wrong island, as the pilot called it, ended up revealing essential truths, not just about the people who live there, but about the very nature of war, identity, and the stories we choose to tell. As the world moved on, Niihau returned to its quiet rhythms, its shores once again governed by the wind and the tides. But the echoes of those 7 days remain, a powerful reminder of a forgotten chapter of World War II that challenges everything we think we know about the home front. If this story moved you and you want to uncover more hidden histories that reshape our understanding of the past, please subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching.